get us started now then.
It is all what I started saying.
Okay, well, we're going to begin. I don't have my watch, but I know we're a little bit late starting, and we want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers because this is about interaction, I think. My name is Sue Martin. I'm an adoptive parent, also the spouse of an adoptee. We adopted our son, if you've read the syllabus, we adopted our son as an infant. He was what is called a matching white infant placement. It was a private placement, not through an agency. And my son is now 19, so we have been through a lot of stuff. Karen?
And I'm Karen Gora. I'm an adoptive parent. I have adopted 2 children who would be described today in the listings books as special needs. My first child is a boy, and he came to live with us at age 6. We adopted him at age 7. He came from 5 placements prior to mine and was headed for an institution at the time that he came to live with me. My daughter came to me at age 4, the product of an adoption disruption, and she's now 6. So we're going through stuff, lots of stuff.
We figured we missed one, we thought it was too late for us to adopt interracially.
That's true.
We missed before this conference, so we don't have that experience.
I'm also married to an adoptee.
This is about reality, and I guess one of the realities is you know who we are, where we're coming from, and we'd like to know, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves. Let's start over here. Who you are, what part of the triad, or social worker, or what?
Okay, I'm Anna Maria Busquets. I come from Miami. I'm a psychotherapist. I work with children that are in the process of being adopted, special needs children for Children's Home Society in Florida. These are children from the ages of 5 to 12 that either have been in placements and been disrupted, or the court has just removed them from their homes.
I'm Sally Graves. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I'm an adopted parent of 2 22-year-olds who are special needs, who were adopted in Chicago.
I'm Bruce Anderson. I'm supervisor of foster care and adoption at the Public Children's Services Agency.
I'm Peggy Meyer. I'm an adoptive parent of 3 children that are biological siblings. And I'm in Minnesota and didn't find a lot of the support and resources I needed, so I started an organization called RAP, Resources for Adoptive Parents. And in 2 years, we have 850 parents and professionals on our mailing list.
Wonderful.
I'm Judy Johnson, and I'm an adoptee, and I'm just here to listen. My search has been completed a long time.
I'm Jean Barlow from Honolulu, and I'm an adoptive parent whose children both this year searched and found their birth parents. And our very new triad support group managed to pass legislation for open records this year.
That's great.
My name is Beverly Keeler. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. I am a social worker working for an adoption agency, basically with newborn infants, some older child placements, and I'm also an adoptive parent. I have a son who's 13 and a daughter 8.
I'm Susan Graybones from Minneapolis, and I'm an adoptive parent. I have a 15-year-old Korean daughter.
I'm Becky Witt from Kansas City, Missouri. I'm the director of a small private adoption agency here.
I'm Gail Merkel. I'm from Oak Park, Michigan, working in post-adoption counseling and therapy.
I'm Sharon Richards, and I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And I just recently opened an organization that provides adoption education to prospective adoptive couples, and I'm one. I'm in an open adoption match. My baby will be due in August. My birth mother and birth father, and my husband and I all met. So I come at this from many different sides at this point.
I'm Rita Rice. I'm from Ontario, Canada. I work in a public agency, and I'm a post-adoption services coordinator.
Lavega Doxey, and I've done social work in Chicago, Illinois for 8 years, but I'm here from Atlanta, Georgia, because I relocated there about 9 months ago, and I work for a private agency, and we provide pre- and post-adoption services to families. And then we're also in contact with a lot of adopted persons who are now coming back and wanting to search, and the law just recently changed in Georgia. So agencies who have been doing adoptions for a long period of time are going to be getting even more involved with searches.
I'm I'm Debbie Owen from Kansas City, and I work in a small agency.
I'm Ellen Weisselman from Lafayette, Illinois. I'm a parent of 3 children by adoption. I'm also an adoption consultant that meets with prospective adoptive parents for purposes of helping them learn how to adopt and their children as to the issues.
I'm Leo Martin, Sue's husband. I'm here to listen.
And critique. We miss these two ladies here.
Oh, you know, yeah, she said too, so I thought you were. I'm Joanne Swanson. I'm with Post Adoption Support Services, and also I'm now a consultant to Lutheran Social Services of Wisconsin and Upper Michigan, the Upper Michigan part, where we just started doing open adoption placements. And I also started a support group in my area, and I'm amazed at the adoptive parents who are coming out, and I'm at this session to try to learn everything I can to help them, because from the birth parent's perspective, I need to know how to reach around the corner behind you.
I'm Audrey Wall. I'm a social worker from Miami, Florida, for a private agency, and I do post-adoption. I do searches, and I speak with all members of the triad.
Oh, we got 2 more. Shall we continue?
Sure.
Yeah, we're introducing ourselves, and now you're in time to introduce yourself.
I'm Laura Pleasance, and I work with Karen at the Adoption Information Center of Illinois.
And this gentleman?
I'm Noah Shine from Montana, Delaware.
I just walked into introduction.
Yes, you sure did, and you're the last one, so you get to introduce yourself.
We're not going to take any more after you.
I'm a presenter. Oh, I'm Warren Welwood, and I'm from here, Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm an adoptive parent, and I'm a lawyer, and I'm on the board of an organization that does pregnancy counseling and adoption placements.
Okay, so this is about reality, and this is the reality of adoption. You have mom and dad and their adopted children, mom and dad's parents, the children's adoptive grandparents. This is the immediate family. Outside the family are each of these adopted children's birth parents. And they're there, whether these children ever meet them, ever talk to them, ever write them a letter or get a letter, ever have pictures, ever search, ever have a reunion. They're there. Which is something that's sometimes hard to explain. I'm with Truth Seekers in Adoption in Chicago, and we had an irate adoptive mother call recently saying that we had disrupted her family, her adoptive family. We had made an intermediary call for a birth mother to her son, who was 23 years old. And we had ruined her family. And I said, where did you think this boy came from? She didn't want him. She wasn't real until today when contact was made. Well, this woman was very irate and very upset, so upset that she said she had called her son's pediatrician. Whereupon I lost it, and did what you just did. I just laughed, and she said, oh, it was the wrong thing to do. I should not done that. But this is a 62-year-old lady who would prefer to believe that she is the only mother for this child. But that isn't reality. And now reality had come to her, and she was having to accept it now. But she was fighting it pretty hard. Yes. So we're here to talk about reality.
I think where I wanted to begin today is to talk about the expectations of all the members that are involved in the adoption process. But before I start to talk about the expectations, I'd like to talk a bit about the adoption process. By that I mean that the adoption process is a lifelong process. And I know we're using terms like pre-adoption, adoption, placement, post-placement, post-legal. It's all part of the same process, the process that continues through life called adoption. Once a person enters into the adoptive process, they are in that process for the rest of their life. It doesn't begin and end in a courtroom, and it doesn't begin and end in a labor room. Okay? That's one thing. I want each person comes to the adoption experience with a set of expectations and with a history and with a background. And I want to talk a little bit about expectations, but before I do that, I know everybody just had lunch, but not everybody had dessert. So I want to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is food, a little bit before we do that. When I thought about what I could count on in my life, or what in my life brought back wonderful, fond memories to me, what was consistent that I knew that every time I went to it, I could count on it. When they told me, as I was in my process, I was in my preparation process to adopt, I had to become a consistent person. What could I always count on? Find something that you could always count on. Well, there was one thing that was given to me in my youth that I always knew that I could count on for gratification. And it was a candy that was relatively safe. Why was it safe? Because it didn't make me dirty. Because when you were in the car on the way to church on Sunday morning, you wanted to keep the kids quiet. They came up with this candy when I was a little girl with the purpose that we wouldn't get dirty when we would eat this candy. So Grandma was the one who found it first. So my first identification was that I knew that if I saw Grandma, I was going to get something sweet to eat that wasn't going to make me messy, so it was okay. As I went through my life, I found out that I had hung on to the things that were familiar to me and hung on to the things that I could count on. And I had learned to expect something every time I went for this particular thing. So I want to share some of my good childhood memories with each of you. But I'm going to ask you, being the controlling human being that I am, not to eat these until I tell you to. Okay? I would like to give you.
Ooh, thank you.
I think that as when I was growing up, I would go around and I would say, I have to cram for a test when I was in school. And when I'd be cramming for the test, there would be a certain color that I would eat because that gave you better memory. My brothers and I were great at this kind of stuff, right? So we would buy a bag of these little candies, and my brother, who always made sure that everything was fair, would divide them up by color because he told me, and being the oldest, I believed him, that there was an equal number of each color in every bag. Now, he ate all the black ones. I got the red ones. There was never as many red ones. And my younger brother, who was too dumb to know the difference, the yellow ones. So I learned at an early age to be discriminant about the type of color that I was going to ask for when we all got into the grab of which ones we were going to ask for. But I did know one thing. There was a difference in the color, but there was never a difference in the taste. I could always count on what it was going to taste like. Oh, I got to taste something. My brother would do this. He would go through and he would choose one just for us. That was so nice of him. He always saved the biggest one. When we got a little bit older and I went to high school, I found out that a lot of these candies had a lot to do with love affairs. I don't know if anybody of you found that out, but when one of my friends would be in love, it could be a 2-bag day. And when that boy dumped him, it could be an 8-bag. That was when the half-pounders came out. You ever see those whole-pound bags of candies that came out? And we would commiserate with one another. We would go get a couple of bags of these candies and sort of talk, and we would sit around and talk about how nobody wanted that guy anyway. You know? But I always knew that I could come back for satisfaction to these nice little items. I noticed though, as we got older, they took the red ones off the market one day. They said they weren't good for us anymore, but they're back. We must have found a good way to make bread again. That's kind of nice to know. All the way down to the bottom. I do know, though, that from the time that I was about 6 years old until today, I could depend on having satisfaction each and every time I indulged. Don't forget. In one of these other communities. I always knew what to expect from the candy. I always knew what I was going to get when I ate the candy. So I'm going to invite you now to eat the candy that I gave you. Okay. And eat all of it. If I gave you 8 pieces, you got to eat them all at one time. You didn't give me one. I didn't give you. Well, I will give you.
You know, you can't eat just one.
No, you can't. Now, what I'm going to ask you is, as you're chewing, how many of you are now chewing exactly what you expected you were going to be chewing as I was talking? How many of you are eating something different than what you thought I was going to eat? Your expectations were not met, were they? The largest problem, the largest cause of adoption disruption is unmet expectations. And that's what we're going to begin today. Each person comes into this experience with a set of expectations. Can you take your expectations and can you turn them into the reality or accept the reality that you live with? Some of you got a mint and you were expecting a chocolate, and that could be okay. And it may be that you hate mint and you really don't want mint. You really wanted chocolate. And if what you really wanted was chocolate and what you got is mint, you're never going to be satisfied with the mint. It's always going to feel less. When we begin with the losses, and we begin the adoption experience with loss, and the adoption experience, the shared thing that every member of the triad has at the beginning of the adoption experience is loss. Every person in that triad has experienced a loss. The adoptee has lost their biological parents and the entire biological extended family. In that loss, they have lost the primary physical bond that comes with being born to a human being. The adoptive parents have lost the ability to provide the bond, the physical bond with another human being. They will not ever be able to have that bond. That's lost forever for them. They will have attachment with their child. They will not have that bond. And the birth parents have lost their child. They have lost the same bond, the same loss that the adoptee has had. They have lost that as well. That bond that I'm talking about, that is a physical bond, never goes away. It never ends. It can be denied. You could try to stomp on it. You can try to say that it doesn't exist. People can try to pretend that the child was never adopted. Just don't tell them, right? They'll never know. And they know. Children know. Anyway, it cannot be denied forever. That's a game that people play. It's there. So when we talk about expectations, what does the adoptive family expect when they're entering into this process? They've walked into the adoption agency, and what are they expecting? Their expectation is that they're going to get a child. But what child? Is their expectation the child that they would have conceived? Is the expectation the child that died? The child that they should have had? The child we call the dream child. They had a dream. When you're at an age when you begin to think that you're going to have children, girls start to realize that they're going to have their own baby someday. Boys start to realize that they're going to be a daddy. You begin to dream what that child is going to be like. Maybe it's going to have grandma's musical abilities and grandpa's hair and mom's legs. But you have a preconceived dream of what your child is going to be, that you're going to have someday when you grow up and get married. And again, when you fall in love and you marry, that dream comes back because now you're going to share your life with this other human being, and together you're going to produce biological offspring, and they are going to be somebody, and you have a dream. When that dream doesn't happen, when couples are disappointed through infertility, the dream has to die. That dream has to go before a family can be ready for adoption. Now, I don't think that you ever totally lose a dream of being a parent or having a child, but a set notion that my child would be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl. You know, I'm going to get that blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl that I lost so long ago, that I dreamed of so long ago, that's going to play music, that's going to be a football star, that's going to bring me happiness. If that dream has not gone and it has not been replaced with something else, then that family is going to have a very, very difficult time making the adjustment. I think that birth mothers expect to have their children raised by a set of parents that are going to stay with that child always. That doesn't always happen. Those expectations are not always met. In our case, we have an open adoption with my son's adoption. His mom's expectation on placement date was that this was going to last until he was 18. And then the law couldn't tell anybody what they were going to do anymore, and he was going to come back and take care of her. So she wanted to make sure that she picked somebody that would educate him and make sure that he had enough money to come back. Everybody has a set of expectations. My son's expectation, being that he was an older child, he had been in 5 homes already, his expectation was, get the presents they're going to give me and get out. Because nobody's keeping me. I am already 6 years old, and I go. So this time, I'm going to get that 10 speed out of these people before they kick me out the door. And he was going to control that. His expectations, he was going to control his coming and his going. You know, when he was going to tell us when he was going to leave. So he was negotiating everything from day one. I'll come to live with you, and my requirements are Nike shoes, ice shirts, 10-speed bike, Schwinn only, please. Perhaps a BMX.
TV in my room.
Yes, the TV in my room. Now he did not ask beyond that for anything but his own Visa account. He thought that would fulfill his own expectations.
Smart kid.
He's a very smart child. He did not expect love. He did not expect acceptance. He did not expect to live to grow up. He expected that his birth father, who had died, was going to come back and kill him. And those are the set of expectations that he walked into our home with, that we had to live with. Of course, being adoptive parents, we expected a rough time. They told us we were going to have a rough time. We were going through a period of adjustment. And what kind of, well, you could expect the honeymoon. That lasted 5 or 6 hours on one of the visits one time. But we expected that we're good-humored people. We're pretty flexible. I haven't yet figured out how to be consistently flexible, but I'm still working on that. But that's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be really consistent at the same time we're supposed to be really flexible. So we kind of do consistency over here and flexibility over here. And sometimes you look a little wishy-washy when you do that. We knew we would have to, we expected to have to change our lifestyle because we were childless up until this point. A true two-career family who pretty much went and did what they pleased. If we decided to go away for the weekend, we closed the door, we got in the car, we went away. And I remember looking at my husband and saying, weren't we clever not to take a newborn baby because we don't have to carry a diaper bag, right? We had to buy a van because we have to carry a bicycle with us everywhere we go. And we have to have a car big enough so that he can't get at you while you're driving so that you don't get killed on the way to wherever you're going. So, you know, there were a lot of other adjustments and that we had to make. And I remember my parents had a set of expectations. I was going to bring them. I had two alternatives. I could bring them either a purely Irish grandchild, or I could bring them a purely Italian grandchild. My father's Italian, my mother's Irish. So I was either going to have this beautiful little Italian girl to bring home to meet them, or I was going to have this wonderful little Irish boy. Well, I happened to have placed with me this wonderful little Irish boy who's got freckles. He looks like a Holly Howie doll. He's got freckles and he's got red hair. And he's very small, he's very petite, he's very active, and he's very verbal. And he looks so adorable and innocent. He looks so innocent. And if he would walk into somebody's, Laura's met my son, if he would walk into your home and he would stand there, so you would think, what a nice young man. And then an hour later, you'd be saying, Karen, when are you going? I said, doesn't Jim need to go somewhere? Not here. His behaviors were such that he was, what we didn't know is how afraid he was for anybody to get to know him. So at any time that he began to feel that he liked somebody, or that he would like to stay there, he would immediately begin to behave in a manner that would ask the people to certainly ask him to never come back again. And what we didn't know is how talented a 6-year-old child could be at deviance. And so we thought that we were going to teach him something. Well, he's really taught me a lot in the last 7 years. We had to change constantly. We constantly have to change and rearrange our expectation. But I do remember that we had a dream once. We dreamt that we were going to be parents, that we were going to take a child into our home, that we were going to have a rough time, but that everything was going to be okay. Everything was going to work out okay. I don't remember anymore exactly what we dreamt that he was going to look like or act like. That dies as you go along the road, and the child that you have becomes your dream. And they tell me eventually it will get to a point when he's later on in adolescence that we'll wonder if we ever had a dream at all, because you get so actively involved in dealing with a teenager. We haven't gotten to that stage yet. He had to change his expectations in the hard, cold reality that he was going to stay in our home. And in that evoked the grief process that comes with that. As he began to live day to day in our home and began to realize that he wasn't going to leave, and he began to build trust, he began to release some of his feelings of loss, some of his anger, some of his denial. He is going through the entire grief process. We needed to learn how to cope and how to deal with that and how to recognize that. On the same token, his mom, we have an open adoption. We do see one another. We do have the opportunity to visit and to share information, which has been good because kids come with holes. Kids who have been multiply placed come with holes. Was I ever 4? Was I ever really born? Where was I? Your children ask you, where was I when I was 2? And you may not know. An adoptive parent may not know where that child was when they were 2 if they didn't meet them until they were 8, and they don't have a full history on the child. They'll say, well, you were somewhere on God's earth. I don't know where you were. That's not a good enough answer for that child. The child may not be able to go with that. So in the lucky part that we had was to be able to go back to a birth mother and say, where was he when he was 2? Where was he living? What was he doing? What did things look like then? And to fill that in. Do you want to give a little bit more?
Now, lest you think that this is unique only because this was an older child placement. It isn't. Because although our son came to us at 7 days right out of the hospital, his expectations were, as a young, real little person, that he was just ours and that everybody was adopted. I mean, he knew he was adopted, but his experience was adoption, so everybody's adopted. So his realization of what adoption means was the trigger for his grief. When David was about 5 and a half, he came to me one day and he said, I was a really ugly baby, wasn't I? And I said, no, you weren't. I went and got the album because he was a beautiful child. He was like those pictures of the Christ child in your family Bible or whatever. He had lots of red blonde hair and he was beautiful. Oh, well, he kind of, looked like, well, that's what she's telling me. I didn't pick up on that. Oh, I know so much more now. If I had only known some of this sooner, if I could have been prepared, if I could have had the answers, if I could have rehearsed the answers a little bit better. Next day, he's back at me again. He said, babies cry all the time, don't they? I bet I cried all the time. Okay, what is this all about? No, you didn't. You were a good kid. You didn't sleep during the day much, but you were a good kid. You slept through the night, da-da-da-da. What is this about? Well, she didn't want me, did she? So he's 5.5, and he's figuring out now what adoption is. Adoption means first somebody doesn't want you, somebody doesn't keep you. And I can't really think what a profound loss that is to anyone, to feel unwanted by the prime person in your life, your mother. So I didn't know any better. I didn't know about grief work and that he would have some and would need some help with it. I know that now. All I could do is to try to explain to a 5-year-old sex education to a 5-year-old, which is sometimes people get real close and they're in love and they're not thinking about making a baby, but sometimes they make a mistake and they have a baby, and then they have to find a home for that baby, and your mother wanted you to have a mommy and a daddy, and she wasn't married, and all of this stuff. And what did he get out of that whole message? I'm a mistake. Well, it's taken years to get back past that. We've raised a kid who in high school was diagnosed as passive aggressive. He's having a lot less problems now, but it's been a long road. And that feeling of rejection and my denying that he could have his grief, that we could share the loss that my husband and myself felt of the child that we were going to have. And David's feeling that he could never be that child, and of course he can't. And that he doesn't need to. I mean, we don't feel that he does need to, but he thinks he needs to be that child to fit in. I think this is a mistake that I see a lot of adoptive parents make. It's, oh, but we're all together now. You know, it's the big bandage love that's going to make it's all right. You don't need to think about those people. That you have us, and that's enough. And I think it is enough now, but at 5 or 6 or 7, and you're also trying to explain this to somebody whose cognitive ability can't accept that. I mean, to a 5-year-old, you never give away anything you love, so it's very difficult to explain. What I would have given for a birth mother that he could have seen, for a letter from her that might have in some way explained it. Because the look on his face when he was 12, and we did have some positive response from his birth mother, was such joy. Because no matter what I would ever say, interpreting her feelings to him, they're coming through me, and Mom's going to try to make it sound better, or Mom's not really telling the whole story, even if I had known the whole story, which I didn't. The only person who can truly explain to an adoptee why is the person who placed him, and why and how. So the issues are still, I mean, this is such a downer topic, I'm sorry, but it is. It's grief and loss, but it can be dealt with if you know it's coming. And it may not be that child who comes up with these questions first. In our case, really, it wasn't David who first broached the subject of adoption. It was our next-door neighbor's son, who was very precocious, who, after preschool one day, as we're sitting around singing The Witch's Song, it was Halloween, and he had had the floor, and he had lost the floor, and wanted to get it back, and comes up with the wonderful top banana statement. So, Dave, how come your mother threw you away? Oh. So, you need to, I've tried to tell adoptive parents that they need to be prepared for these things. You need to have people who you talk to about adoption and people who don't need to know that your kid is adopted. And you need to give your children comebacks for things like that. You've had that with Jim.
I think one of the things when the children who are very verbal, if you're very open about your adoption at home, and kids are very verbal and they're feeling like, they go through, they get really euphoric. Oh, everybody in the world should be adopted, just like me. Right, poor you get to live with your birth family, And then and then they jump from that to, nobody wanted me, nobody loved me, I'm not good enough, I'm too ugly, my son is so beautiful. I could slap him when he says that. And it's really hard for me to say, Jimmy, you are so gorgeous, you are so perfect, because I have to let him say, yeah, I'm so ugly. And then they'll come back and at me for, now, and I'll say, I'm not that ugly. But he would go through all this. Well, he was so in such a spot where he had had a really good visit with his birth mom. And he had gotten a book of pictures. And the first picture in the book was a picture of his mom while she was pregnant with him. And we were so happy to get this because it validated for him that he was ever born to a human being. It was a very precious piece of information for him to have and a very wonderful thing for her to share. Along in that book then were all of his baby pictures up until the age that he was placed. So he has a complete collection of yearly pictures of himself, which is something that not every child has, especially an older child. So he immediately took this for show and tell in school. And we told him, do not take this. So I took it out of the backpack and I sat down and I said to him, not everybody in your classroom knows your story. And so you may not want to share with them that you're adopted and then whip out a picture of your birth mother. You know, they may not like that. That might scare some of your classmates. And he said, okay, Mom, I understand. And then he waited for me to go in the kitchen, and he went and he got his book, and he put it in his backpack, and he went to class, and he said, I have something for show and tell today. And he pulled it out, and he told them his entire story, from the day of his birth, to the day of his removal, to the reasons for his removal, to all of his placements to home.
How old is he?
8. He was 8 years old when he did this. And
their honesty and their candor, we should learn
Yes,
and listen.
we should learn.
Society's not ready.
And he got met with, one of his lovely kids said, well, what did you do to make your parents do all that and then get rid of you? You must have been bad. He did not understand what he was trying to tell them. He was really angry and miffed. And then the teacher called me. You start to get the teacher phone calls. This is not your child been at school today. Yes, of course I know. What did he do this time? And she told me what he had done, and I said, oh, he took a real big chance at sharing the information, but I'm really proud of him for taking the chance. How was it met? She said, I have informed him that he should never speak of the subject in my classroom. And I want you to take that book away from him and never to speak of it. This is not a concern in his life. I said, excuse me? She said, anything that happens to you beyond 2 years ago, no longer matters in your life. I said, when did you get your degree? She said, 6 years ago. I said, then you're not a teacher. It doesn't matter anymore. It's invalidated. Go back to school. But that
You always were shy, Karen.
Yeah, I always had a little bit of problems.
Was she an adoptive mother that got the child right out of, was she an adoptive mother?
I believe she has adoption issues, yes. She's never admitted anything except that I must be a bad mother if I speak of adoption in my home. Yeah, there's something wrong with me to speak of this. And it's not healthy. They came to my house with social worker and told me that it's not healthy to speak of such things openly in the home.
Social worker?
Mm-hmm. School social worker,
Oh,
not a clinical social
not
worker.
still attending that school.
No, he's not. No, he left the school 2 weeks later. He went to a different school. But it was an interesting experience. But this particular school district, throughout the school district, this is their attitude.
So we're getting into the
It's in Illinois. It's District 102. But I will share with you that I went and talked to the National Association of School Psychologists last year. And I presented to them the issues of separation and loss and adoption.
Got
And
the
they
tomato
told
stains
me,
off your forehead
they
yet?
told me to shut up. I mean, they stood up in the room and started to scream at me and told me to shut up and not to say these things, that they didn't want to hear this, that it couldn't possibly exist, that there was no loss involved in adoption, and that those of us that were going around saying this needed to stop it and we needed to shut up. And I was presenting with the school psychologist who was she was over here. And so I thought, I didn't check out who I was talking to at the beginning, so then I said, how many adoptive parents do we have in the room? And 3/4 of the room put up their hands. And I said, okay, then you guys are living with this on a day-to-day basis, on a personal basis. You're not here as professionals. We're all here as adoptive parents. Let's talk about it in this way. And they all informed me that their children were very grateful for being saved from the lives of poverty and deprivation, and that their children were not going to search for somebody who abandoned them anyway.
And they had no problems.
And there was no differences to the people who had adopted children from Korea. There was no difference between the Korean child and any other child in the neighborhood, the people who had no differences. And I listened to him and I said, I understand that there's no difference in your love, but there's a physical difference and there is a cultural difference. And that wasn't what I was there to discuss with him. I was there to discuss general issues.
In our county, we have a program through the HRS, it's called MAP. And it's a program to introduce adoptive parents and anybody interested in the adoption issue and foster parents into the grief and crises and all the emotional ups and downs and whatever the expectations that you face with adopted children and foster children. So I just can't fathom these people relating like that.
The professional community is very naive on this subject.
In the dark ages.
People who have adopted, people who have relinquished, people who have adopted, people who are adopted, no.
There's a Bill Pierce mentality out there, though, that's just if I say it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist.
They think that they can make a birth parent not exist by saying that they don't exist. And the law says that the birth parent no longer exists. So they have the law on their side. So then why is it, if that's true, if that statement's true, that a judge's gavel and a piece of paper can make a human being not exist anymore, why is it that my son never calls the agency seeking a visit with his mother, that within 24 hours she doesn't always also call seeking a visit for him? It has never happened. That biological bond doesn't have anything to do with a piece of paper or a courtroom. But people will do everything they can to deny it because Americans, I think, we're materialistic. We have to own things. We have to own our children. We have to own our cars. Look at where the ads are. We want to adopt your child. They're usually right next to the auto ads, you know. In between pets, want to buy in automobiles is adoptions. And to me, that just says so much about the mentality of the American society that says, yes, you do. This is property that you are bartering over.
Don't you think they're denying difference too, that they just don't realize that there is a difference with adopted families?
I think so, and I think that that's the beginning of the grief process. The first step in grief is denial. And the longer the denial goes on, the stronger the anger, the harder the tears. The longer the tears are withheld, the longer they will last.
I was adopted when I was 9 by people who, the woman told me, she says, you don't talk about the past. And she changed my name from Mary Lehman's Red to Regina Iris Burge.
She total
cut off. And I made her a Valentine card on Valentine's Day before the adoption was finalized that said, your daughter-to-be. She went into a rage. Why? How dare I write her this Valentine? Said that. They said, well, why don't you read such books? I know how to be a mother, and she read nothing, you know. And we were abused. We were beaten with belts. We were just, you know, I grew to hate her. And they used us for housework out our ears. Every time we turned around, it was like we almost had no childhood. And who cried hardest when she died? I did. Yeah. But it was her loss because she lost something very, very precious in the process.
I think that the hardest loss...
She wouldn't let me grieve.
Right.
I think I'm living through that now.
Right. Unresolved grief is the hardest thing to live with. And it is what keeps children from moving on. When a child, time a child is traumatized, and a move is a trauma. If the move happens on the day of birth, that the child is taken from the mother that gave that child birth to the adoptive mother's arms, that child has experienced trauma and loss of their birth mother. Every time a child moves from then on is another trauma. Children who have been multiply placed are multiply traumatized. And what happens to that child is that a piece of their emotional growth stops there. Children who are traumatized stop growing, either emotionally or socially, some of them physically. My son didn't grow for years. When he came to me at 6, he weighed 36 pounds and he was 32 inches tall. He wore a size 4 towel. He was in first grade, though, because chronologically he was supposed to be in first grade. He acted like a preschooler. He really belonged in a developmental preschool class. But, you know, when you're 6, you have to go into first grade. But he didn't begin to grow again until he was with me longer than he had ever been with anybody else. And that's when his body began to grow again, and not before then. He didn't feel secure enough in the placement. But you can see it happening in that, in the denial stage comes first. That's the first step of loss. So the first thing he did was deny that he was born to somebody else. I thought that he was going to deny that he was going to stay with me. Of course, I have to kind of figure everything out so I can be 2 steps ahead of him all the time. So I had everything all figured out. He's going to deny that he's going to stay here. That's going to be the first stage. No, he denied that he was born to somebody else and told everybody that he'd really been born to me. And I don't know, I guess we kept him somewhere for 6 years. I think in his heart he was newborn, and he's told me that a million times, that his heart is only 7 years old, that it didn't begin until the day that I took him to be my son. And so because he had stopped it, he had stopped loving anybody because he wasn't going to be given up again. He wasn't going to take that chance. And then when he made the decision to be with us and to love us, and he felt our love, he let himself feel our love, that's what evoked the anger. When he began to feel our love, that's when he got angry. I think one thing that adoptive parents need to know is, as you go through these stages, there's times when your child will do something that another parent would say, I'd knock that kid's block off. My son, when he came to live with us, as I say, he had 5 placements. Some of them happened quite rapidly. So he didn't always get to take everything with him when he went. He had the neatest room in Brookfield. I mean, other mothers would say to me, how did you get him to do that so quick? His room is clean. His shoes were in a row, right underneath the edge of his bed. All of his toys were in a perfect row in his toy box. All of his clothes were neatly arranged in his drawers. Everything was hung and organized and hangers. Why? Because when he moved, he knew where everything was, and he wasn't going to lose any more. It stayed in perfect order so that he knew, and his bags stayed where he could get them, so that he could get what he needed to have, and he wasn't going to lose any more possessions. And then one day, you don't always notice this, these things. I'm standing in his room and I'm talking to him, right? And he came up from behind me and he answered me. And his room, I realized, was so messy that lump in his bed, I thought was him. It was one of his toys. He had thrown the blanket over. And I didn't. Now I know he had made the decision. That was how I knew that he had made the decision to stay. Well, fortunately, I have a friend who has been through this, and I could call her up and I said, his room's messy. She said, oh, congratulations. Yeah, but nobody, if I had called up one of my other friends and said, my son's room's messy, she says, well, say now, you're just like the rest of us. She wouldn't have understood the need to celebrate that he had made a decision to stay. He was beginning to claim us as his family because his room got messy. That took about 3 months for his room to get messy. And then we finalized it at 18 months into the placement. But about 9 months into the placement, one day we were chatting. My son likes to do lunch and chat. And we were getting ready to do lunch. We were up in his room discussing what he should wear. And he hit me right between the eyes with all of his might. I mean, he took his little fist and went, poof! And he let me have it. And I saw stars, and I sat down and said, Jim, you hit me. And he said, yes, I did. And I thought, well, you're not supposed to spank your children, right? I mean, you signed this agreement, and this little child has just decked me, and what do I do? So I was so stunned, I said nothing. And he said, I am mad at my birth mom, and you're my mom, so you got it. And I called my caseworker, later on that day. We went out for lunch, and everything was fine, wonderful, and she said to me, well, congratulations, he's declared your mother. And now you have a bullseye on your back, because you will get every ounce of anger that he has. But that was a day for celebration, and that when adoptive parents call me and they say, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, this child's challenging every limit that I have set, this child is calling me names, this child is hitting, this child is spitting at me, this child is breaking all of my favorite things. That is one thing I tell everybody in a preparation group. If you have a particular favorite piece of china, put it away, take it to grandma's, store it, lock it up, do anything that you have to do with it, because when this child's in the anger stage, they know by your body what your favorite things are, and they're gone, they're history. I mean, we had TVs flying down the stairs at us and things like So,
Yeah,
it
and
goes.
lest you think that this is just because he had cause to be angry with his birth mother because of the way she treated him, and cause to be angry with all these foster placements or placements that didn't work out. It's the same thing when the kid is adopted as an infant. Still angry. And you're the mom who's there, and you're the mom who gets him. He's not as angry usually with birth father. Birth father, when they're that young, I think it's somehow amorphous. He's out there. He's a bad guy. He's always a bad guy, but he is out there somewhere. But your mom, and he's angry at mom, and adoptive moms get an awful lot of that anger.
So there's two parts to that, not to take it personally, and to rejoice that he sees you as mom.
That's right. When you see the anger, rejoice it.
Dares to do it.
That's very hard to do. Very difficult to live that out, because it's so ironic.
Yes, it is. And
It's
that
so
is that
different.
is one of the reasons that I will say again and again and again, the only way for adoptive parents to get through it in one piece and have your marriage survive and everything else is to have a support group. You need other adoptive parents around you who get done with.
By way of question, is this the point at which many of these placements fail?
Yep.
That's where they
You got
go,
it.
so they don't get beyond that.
They don't get beyond it. Right. If they don't fail there, they fail at the sadness stage, because then if a child, to work through the sadness with your child is a very hard thing to do. And at that point, you are facing your own sadness too. And if you can't look at your own sadness, you won't be able to face your child's sadness with them, and you have to. My son's worst barrage of abuse that he has memories of was a time when he had been locked in a closet for 3 days. And he had not been fed, and he had been systematically beaten throughout the 3 days while his parents were in bed. And there was a light in the closet, and he was kind of afraid of the dark, so he would crawl up to the top of the closet and turn on the light. It would anger his father when he would see that light under the door, so he would come in and turn off the light and beat him. And finally the man took the bulb out of the closet so that it was dark all the time. And he finally crawled up on the shelf and he fell asleep. And while he was sleeping, they came in and beat him almost to death. He was hospitalized. They didn't take him to the hospital for 3 days, but after they were in family therapy, and the family therapist kind of noticed there was something wrong with the child and took him over to the emergency. That's the worst place he's ever been in his life, to him. That's the worst.
Is that his birth family or a foster home?
That's his birth family. He told me when he was in the sadness stage that he thought he could leave the closet if I held his hand. And the therapist said to me, you're going to have to walk through the closet with him. So you need to prepare you before we start to work on this. To every nightmare you've ever had, you have to face again now with this child. Because if you take his hand and you walk into the closet, don't let it go. And that's when a lot of people let go, and they leave a child in the closet. And that's when a child may give up and never love again. And it's real important that people have enough support to get through what I call the closet. For us, it was the closet. When you do that, when you work through that, then the only other person I've ever really heard describe it was this lady that was just on, Trudy, who had the 92 personalities, and she talked about the cry of the rabbit. And that is a sound when you work with your child and they let that abandonment, sorrow out. That's the sound that they make, that wail. And that can scare the daylights out of you. And you have to be strong enough to go through that. A set of adoptive parents has to be strong enough to go through that together. The mom can't go through it. What kind of wail? It sounds, it's a guttural wail. It sounds like an animal dying. It is true despair. It is a child in true despair. And at that point, when you go through that, and it's an extremely difficult and emotional thing to go through, but when parents go through that, that's when their child is born to that set of parents.
Does that happen in most cases?
Can you get a child to that point, or is it?
I guess what I'm asking is, in order for
for the full circle to come around, is that a necessary step you've got to get beyond? There's no way of shortchanging it.
Are you
I don't
talking
know.
about just the children that have been abused, or
No.
all?
No, I think all children who have felt abandoned need to
And I
go
think
through that.
every adoptee feels that
Yeah.
at some point. you
And
know?
some don't go through it until adulthood.
Yeah.
But
It's
a child
just
from
something-
multiple placements, who's under the age of 10, absolutely.
Absolutely. They're not going to attach to anybody. Attachment work doesn't begin until that part's over. Unfinished business. It's got to be finished, or they won't grow anymore. You'll have a child. This is a common scenario of a multiply placed child. Their emotional development, their social development, and their cognitive development will not be the same, and neither will they equal their chronological age. So you, as a parent, as a professional, need to deal with what you see. You may see a preschooler get out of bed, and you may see an adolescent come home from school. And you have to be prepared to deal with them on the level that they are, which means, you know, behavior modification things with all these little stars on the refrigerator. We tried that. We were well trained. We tried that. It works real good if you've got a kid who's 6 all the time, or who's 12 all the time. But when you have somebody who's 4 and 12 and 15, who do you put the stars on? You know, what happened in the morning is no longer relevant in the afternoon. So parents can't hold grudges, and behavior modification does not work. Positive reinforcement works.
And,
Okay.
and that's something that's so difficult to get across at school.
Exactly. It's the hard- yes.
And that these things don't work for my child.
Right.
And if the reason we want to discipline the child in this way is because we expect to modify his behavior, then let's don't even do it. because
It's a waste.
It's not going to work, and it just it's going to be counterproductive. And that's incredibly difficult.
Yes, it is. I've done battle at schools.
Yeah.
And I know that I will continue to do that.
Well, you know, I just figure my file just has bitch.
Yeah, mine too.
all over it, you know, here she comes again.
Unrealistic woman, I'm sure they have written on mine, and, you know, and a couple of other things.
Do you think adoptive parents will have issues of their own that need to be sorted out?
Yes,
Sure. Yeah.
before the experience begins. Absolutely, absolutely. We don't look at that. And I think that a lot of times in preparation, how thoroughly do we explore, if infertility is the driving factor here, how thoroughly do we explore that? How thoroughly do we explore where is that marital relationship? What were your past experiences? Have you ever lost before? And how did you deal with your losses? Those are the key questions. You know, if you've always had everything you ever wanted, pretty much.
Out of control.
That's right.
Or helpless.
Or helpless. And how did you handle that? How did things work out? Are you afraid if you're out of control? Then you're going to be afraid for the rest of your life.
These kids will scare you.
That's right. Then they know. They know every button to push, and they know how. They know you. They know what you're afraid of. I mean, my son knows I'm afraid of roller coasters. I'm just scared to death of the things, and he will taunt me by going on everything at Great America to make my skin crawl. And I can't even watch. I have to go someplace else. You know, while he goes on them. But just like they know what you love and cherish, and they will break to get their point across. I think that these children speak to us in metaphors through their behavior. Do you want to know how bad my loss is? Here's Grandma's china. This is the only piece you have left of your grandma. Where's your grandma now? That's how bad I feel. But that is what they do. Their behavior, they don't have vocabulary to tell us about things that happened to them when they were 2 and 3 and 5, or how they felt when they knew that the person holding them as a baby was not the same person that carried them inside. Newborns know that. And how do you express that feeling? Children express their grief through behavior. They express their grief through repetitive behavior. We get real mad at kids who stand in front of all kinds of things. Or the kid who does this. Any of you have kids that do this? I did that. I was a foot tap. I made my parents real thrilled by the time they took me in. I thought they were going to cut my feet off before I grew up. But that's how a child expresses grief.
I didn't want to give the wrong impression.
Yeah.
All my life that I was living with my adopted parents, I longed very, very deeply for them to love me as they loved a baby they had adopted. They adopted the baby, and we were always told that baby was so special. It's not that we resented the specialness of that baby they had with this baby, but we were told that. And I hated the abuse, but I loved them.
Yes.
And till the day she died, I, grieved that the love wasn't there that it should have been, so I didn't want to give the wrong impression that I wasn't a loving,
I think
That's,
too,
that
caring
is something
child.
we'd want to talk about too, because despite all the abuse that Jim had,
right, he loves his mother.
he loves his mother.
Oh, yeah.
He loves his mother, and he
His
grieves
birth
the
mother.
loss of his mom and his dad, both. He grieves the loss of the person that put him in that closet and gave him hell, but he grieves, and they asked him, he did a film that Spalding for Children was using as a training aid called Children Who Wait, and they asked him how he felt about things, and if he could have things, if he could have anything he wanted, what would he have? He would have chosen to stay with his parents. He would not have left them ever. That some people find that incredible, but he loved those people, and he still loves those people, and he always will. And I will not deny him his family or his heritage or his right or his love for his birth parents. We get criticized a lot for that, because when you do have a child who is removed for cause and you choose to enter into an open adoption, society thinks there's something wrong with you. Because why would anybody let anybody see a child that they had hit or hurt or
You're not
abused?
fearful that they might hurt him bad again? somehow?
We have an open adoption with an agency control.
Oh, okay.
And so when he or his mom, his father's dead, when he or his mom or his sisters or an extended family want to visit, they contact the agency who then contacts us, because we do not feel, I think you have to be mature and realistic in when we say, because people ask me all the time about open adoption, what do you mean? There's so many angles here. It's a spectrum this broad.
How open it's open.
How open do you mean? Should we all live together? Or should we just send letters? I mean, people, So when either one of them wants any kind of contact, they contact the agency. They're both free to send anything in writing or pictures anytime that they want to, and to leave it there, whether it should be sent with a note to either send us immediately or save it. Jimmy's into saving things right now. And they're both free to ask for a visit whenever they feel the need. I don't go for, we'll meet every Christmas or we'll meet every birthday. It has to be when they feel the need to see one another. And he just recently had a meeting with his birth mom and told her that he's having difficulty with the loyalty issue, and that he feels as though it's not doing him any good to see her, so he doesn't want to see her again until he's 16. So he sat down and he had a talk with her about it and told her that he cared about her and he loved her, but that he wasn't going to come for 4 more years to see her again. And then he had a talk with me afterwards and explained to me that his expectation of me was to keep him safe, but he's got work to do, and that I should back off. So in other words, he'll let me know when I can have a hug. He'll let me know, and he's also going to let me know when I'm the target, and I'm still the target. But he is in a space, and adolescence is a good time when this happens. So not only is your child perhaps acting out their grief in a manner that's undesirable to you, in a manner that society may not deem acceptable, you're also at a point where you're getting a lack of affection from the same child. And this is a time when it takes every ounce of faith you have in a higher power that you're going to get through this. My son's 12 now. Now, I know that we're not at the bad part yet. You've been through that. A lot of the phone calls that I get are children who begin the rejecting at 12, and it continues, and it compounds, and it snowballs throughout adolescence. And you have to hang in, And so I guess one of the things I'm saying is that if you're expecting gratification, or if you're expecting a return of love, it's never going to come the way you think that it's going to come. And that's a reality. It comes. There are blessings that you thought you never were going to have. In all of the horribleness, one time my son said to me, I was some jealous woman who stole him. I mean, if you think that there isn't a fantasy because the child wasn't adopted at birth,
Sure.
I was a jealous woman who stole him from his mother one day while she was asleep. Okay?
That's why we're talking about the need for the reality, because if there isn't the reality, the fantasies that kids make up can be just as bad.
And they'll have
and
fantasies
worse.
anyway, but
I just want to say, as you speak, I see similarities between a loss from a parent when they're adopted, and also a loss in a divorce.
Yes.
I see very.
And many other adopted families have compared their adoption experience to that of a marriage. There is a choice that comes with the parents to love the child, and a choice that comes with the child to love the parents. And the shared relationship comes with the history of everybody involved, just like a marriage.
How do you handle it when your child breaks that last piece of china?
You
First.
identify the feeling of the child first. Deal with your child. I have a big towel in my bathroom because sometimes the stuff he does is funny and sometimes it's hurtful. So I'm either in my bathroom with my head in the towel laughing. And there have been times when that's happened. Like the one time we came home and we have a picture window in the front of the house, and then there's a wall between to the kitchen, and then we have a huge window in the back of the kitchen. Okay, both windows were broken. And I come into the house and I said, and there was babes, and I looked at babes, I said, what happened? And Jimmy said, nothing.
After God.
I said, well, there's a broken window, and the babysitter said, no, there's two broken windows. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, he threw a Nerf football. I said, how many times? Once. One time he got two windows and they weren't even in line with one another. I don't know how he did it, right? And my husband didn't know what he wanted to do to him first. And here's this little tyke looking at us going, I don't know what you're talking about. So I just went in the bathroom, got the towel, and went, oh. Came back out and called the glass man. Because what can you do about it? Now, when he broke the crystal, I said, I identified my loss in his loss. I said, I understand. You are really angry and hurt, and that really hurt me. Let me tell you about the hurt that I felt when you broke that. Not to make him feel guilty, but to identify the fact that I hurt too. And I said, so you were hurting. And he would say, and then he said, don't you understand? They never let me see my grandmother again. I do now. I do now.
I heard it explained with the word inducement, and that they're trying to induce an anger in us to simulate what the anger they're feeling over the abandonment.
And most kids do that.
That's
Most
right.
kids who are, my children do that, who are born to be and not raised.
And you know that gives
The intensity is not there. The revenge and the
enragement.
The enragement.
is not there. But for adoption, it's lost.
And also, safety and control issues are the pervasive issues throughout. And our children are searching hard to feel normal. They don't feel like other children. And if they can evoke you to be enraged or to feel the way that they feel more normal. So I encourage adoptive parents to show their feelings. I know a lot of times adoptive parents don't want to do that. They need to be in control. And what happens is that then the stronger message to the child is when you get that mad, then that's not normal. So I'm really not normal. There's really something wrong with me. I'm really crazy. So we have what we call hissy fit days at our house. You know, my daughter does it the best one. I mean, she's just the winner. But she could swing both hands and kick both feet and have everything off the ground all at once and not fall down. I mean, it's just utterly amazing to me what she can do. You know. And so we mock them. Everybody has a hissy fit day, and I get to have a hissy fit. My husband gets to have a hissy fit. But the kids have a sense of humor that's okay. You know, you can have hissy fits here. I don't like it when they do it in the middle of church. You know, I get a little upset when they do. And we have to take them. We've got to take. You know, they usually are the most respectable place on earth to do this. You know, and so you have to know and kind of keep a sense of humor.
There's an adoptive mom that I'm hoping will start coming to our group, and I really need to ask this question because I need to be able to talk to her about this. I understand that she has 4 adopted children. They're all nightmares, according to what I'm hearing. Got them all in infancy. However, she's been in the Tough Love program for years and is getting nothing out of this. And from what I hear from BJ Lifton, it's the worst thing you can do to an adopted child.
That's right.
But I don't have the background right now to answer her, and that's one thing I'm going to have to talk to her about. Could you just speak to
Just
that?
what they need is another rejection.
Well, that's kind of what I have in
For
mind.
adopted families.
For adopted families.
Nor is military school.
No, it isn't. Tough love goes on a basis that you had a grounding and a shared moral code. You do not have that in these cases. You do not have that. You cannot use those, just like behavior modification won't work. Because don't forget, you have a child that is not all on the same level. And so it does not work. Slow, positive reinforcement works. Telling your child always what it is that you like works. There are going to be days when they're going to just be losers. I mean, you know, kids 10, adults in the rest of the world 0. They're just going to have to learn to accept that. Because when they need to work on their stuff, right now I have a child who's working on his stuff. There's not going to be any way that they're going to let anybody win. I mean, you know, if you, when they told me praise him every day, and he was doing some of these wonderful things like riding his big wheel down the stairs, he cut the leaves off my tree, he cut the whiskers off the cat, he poked holes in the hose, and then he took the big wheel outside and he came back in 6 pieces. We don't know how he did that. It only took him about 30 seconds. So it was like one of those days when every time you turn around, this child is doing kind of something that you don't want them to do. And you're supposed to find something to praise about the child every day, give him a sticker, right? And I thought, what am I gonna praise him for? That was the best destruction job I've ever seen on a big wheel, you know. Threw dinner at me, told me he was only gonna eat white food, and since I had given him something that was colored, he whipped that, and he wasn't even gonna eat my food. I mean, he was just not gonna accept anything from anybody that day, and that was all there was to it. So in the morning he woke up, I sat on the edge of his bed, I waited for him to I said, you did such a good job sleeping. It was like, feed them at their own game. And he looked at me and said, you got me. You know, you got me, Mom. And he gave me a hug. So sometimes you can, if you can bring some humor into it and understand that there's not going to be every day that the parent is going to win out as the parent. You know, there's going to be just days, that's all.
And you're going to see this with every adoptee. Not this dramatically, perhaps.
But sometimes we feel, and we've gone through it 10 years or so in our support group, they go to some university in the sky
Yes.
that they all have a script. I mean, you hear the same things. And it's so helpful to be able to say to new or adopted parents, 5 other people heard exactly the same thing, and
they didn't send their kid to military.
And they didn't send their kid.
I get people who will call me up and say, you know, this relationship has been going along really well, and our daughter turned 11, and we went to court and we finalized, and she packed and she left, and I go, and they go, well, can't you help me? And I go, well, she's doing exactly the same thing that 25 other girls that have turned 11 and got adopted last week did. You know, knowing that if they're going to go into a fit during identity search, they're going to reject you. They're going to get. My son said the night before we finalized, he said, "Call my worker, get me out of here. I don't know why they put me with 2 turkeys like you and expected me to stay here for the rest of my life." You know, and he was leaving. That was it. He was packing. He was getting out. You know, and I just said, "We're going to court tomorrow. We're going to get adopted. We're all going to live through it." And I went to bed. And he was still there in the morning. He went through it. You know, he went through the adoption. But it was like there's a sense of panic with an older child that's been multiply placed, that this can't really be real. And then it drags up the loss. You know, I mean, we always have that with us. If he accepted me, who did he have to give up? And they don't understand that they don't have to give anybody up. At that age, they're black and white in thought.
Maturity level lacks.
That's right. You cannot expect them to process this the way you and I process this. He cannot say to me, "There's room in my heart to love everybody." Those are nice words, and he'll say them. But he does not feel that, because in this age, it's right or it's wrong. You either have teenage mutant turtle stuff or you're dead. There's no in between. You either have the right kind of shoes or nobody will be your friend. Their entire life is black and white. We can't expect their emotions to be anything else. So when we finalize during adolescence, we can expect torn up clothes, runaways.
Even if you finalized at 6 months, you may
At that
still
age, you're still gonna
have the same scenario in adolescence.
Yeah. You're not my mom. I got that when we got
I hate you fake parents.
Oh, no.
Nice talk.
I said when I was about 14, I'm an adopted parent as well as an adoptee. I just remember saying to my mom, I wanted to go somewhere, you know, and that was probably late or something.
Movies or whatever.
I said, my real mother'd let me do it. She just looked at me and she said, no, she wouldn't. She loves you too. And I remember just looking at her and thought, you creep.
No comeback.
I would get, at my other foster home, they used to let
Yeah.
kids do that. No, they didn't, I know that. Okay, then...
Yeah.
And he had this list. I mean, so-and-so would let me do this, or so-and-so, but he didn't have to go, nobody's going to let you do this. Besides that, I'm your mother now, and that's it. You know, you're not going. That's it. Forget it. You're not going out to the movies at 2 o'clock in the morning. The end. You're not going to do it. And they kind of look at each other, good for you. But then again, my girlfriend, who has a 12-year-old daughter, by birth, goes at her mother too, so I don't worry about it too terribly much. They all think
But that's an
we're
important
still
point, to
ridiculous.
recognize what's not adoption related, because not all behavior is.
That's right.
And I think as adoptive parents, we have to remember that. We can't be peeking under carpets for, oh my God, I have to take this picture.
And I appreciate that, because I'm not an adoptee, but I run support groups, and they're always looking to me, hey, is that adoption issue or regular issue?
Right.
It can be real hard.
And that's what Ken calls the adoption juggle. You're doing the adoption right. Is this an adoption issue? Or isn't it? Is this regular kid stuff?
Tell the difference.
And how do you tell the difference? And how do you deal with it? And how do you get society to accept you? And those are all real difficult issues.
One way I would think is if his hope gets you here or passes you by.
Right.
And that's one way to tell if it's adoption.
When they're older, they'll tell you outright more.
Yeah, and I think too that adoption can be a hook. And I see it most where there's the most secrecy, where there's the most fantasy about the birth family. The idea that I could hang everything on this hook, and if only I could find my real mom, I would be like Cinderella. She's the fairy godmother. She's going to make everything in my life okay. That's one day. The other day is, I must come from some really rotten people, so I can be rotten. I should be rotten. I have to be rotten. I will be rotten.
What do you do when they are in that fantasy stage? That my mom with my
Well,
natural mom.
the best thing, I think, is to not allow the fantasy stage by providing the reality. And people say, well, at what age you're going to tell? You're going to tell a 4-year-old that Dad beat you up, or whatever? Yeah.
And another thing to do when they're fantasizing anyway, I mean, they know the stark, cold reality, but they're going, well, my mom loved me better. My mom would have done just fine, But
Well, Jim's mom would have been able to keep him if only she had a place to stay.
That's right. If only she lived somewhere, she would have been able to keep him. And so I'll say, if the adoptive parent could go with it for a few minutes, so you don't know, in the beginning when the first sentences come out, you don't know if it's anger, or if it's sadness, or if it's guilt, or if it's even mom, because they may start off with mom stuff and it's really birth sister stuff, So the best thing parents can do sometimes is be quiet and listen. And then when they get down to it, they will get down to a feeling. If you can stick with the feelings, stick with identifying and accepting and validating their feelings, the rest of it will come with it. But let them have their feelings. I think one thing we do is try to mend that broken heart. We try to take away their pain.
Make it
we
all
try
okay.
to make it better. The best thing we can do is don't make it better. Let it be. I can't fix it for you, but I'm going to stand right here. Now, I told him when he told me we were going to go through the class that I said, I will hold your hand and I will stand next to you, but I cannot take away any of the razor blades you're going to step on. I'll just step on them with it. That's all that I can do. And that he didn't want me to take any of those razor blades away, as he calls them, razor blades. He didn't want me to do that, but he wanted me there with him because he didn't believe that he could get out of the closet without a parent. And that was remarkable that child, after been through his experience, still recognized and wanted a parent figure in his life. That's a totally remarkable piece. As I said, when you have something to celebrate, it's so wonderful. They're so versatile. They're so resilient, the children are. And sometimes we don't give them enough credit for that because we weren't quiet enough, long enough, to find out what was really going on. So sometimes the best way to handle it is don't say anything, just sit there. Do your best nod. You do your best mom nod.
We had a mom, we say this is one of those things you learn to adopt. She says, deep breath, 5 seconds. Well,
Pregnant pause.
that's a big decision you're talking about, or something like that. Just, that's a heavy thing, or something. That buys you about 10 seconds while you've taken a deep breath, and you're just sort of listening to what's going to happen next.
Because I think if you talk to someone, you reinforce that they parent themselves. They self-parent their kid at age 11. Will never be a kid.
And when they want to recapture a piece of their childhood, they'll do that. They'll go back and they'll say, you've got your 11-year-old who's going to go play with the preschooler next door. A lot of times we try to stop that. We want to reinforce positive peer interaction, which generally peer interaction is garbage, to put it the nicest way that I can. I mean, my son's never been invited to anybody's birthday party but his own. He's the kid in the town that they say, do not bring that child home with you, other parents. So peer relationships are not good for him with children that are chronologically his age. He is wonderful with 3 and 4-year-olds. Sometimes he's wonderful with 8-year-olds, and sometimes he's great with 16-year-olds. And so I have to give him opportunities when I can see the 4-year-old behaviors coming out in him to go play with 4-year-olds in a way that's not degrading to him, which means that we can go to McDonald Land with his younger sister, where he'll have an opportunity to just naturally interact with younger children, rather than sending him to the kindergarten to help out because he knows then what I'm up to, But to give him them a natural opportunity to regress and to expect the regression. And when the school tells you that this child is regressing and therefore there's a problem, and your household must be becoming dysfunctional, to tell the school, isn't it wonderful my child's regressing, my child now trusts me enough to regress. We're having a positive parenting experience with our child. And I tell them things like, you're not allowed to interfere with my therapeutic milieu in my home. You teach my child academics, I'll teach my child to be a person. They don't like me. And schools don't like people who are raising children who are odd and different than other children, and that's just a plain simple fact. And if you don't fit into the conventional terms of the dysfunctional family, they will try to find a way to make you fit into the terms of dysfunctional family. If they have to say anybody that would take a child like this has to be dysfunctional. So you have to know in society that there's going to be places that accept you, and there are going to be places that aren't, and those that aren't have a sense of humor about them and move on.
Yeah, see, schools have their expectations of the adoptee, too. And some of it is self-perpetuating. I mean, the idea that there is this vast overrepresentation of adopted children in special ed classes tells you something. Nobody quite seems to know what. We have some pretty good ideas what, but schools have not appreciated that yet. I think a school psychologist or psychiatrist should be looking for probably depression in a child who's discovered what being adopted means, being relinquished, and should be looking for it prior to adolescence, and should be looking for those problems and dealing with them, because in too many adoptive families, they can't talk about these issues. I mean, nobody wants to see it, the adoptive parents, and I've seen this so many times where kids are asking questions, they want to know, and their adoptive parents, well, he never says anything about that, So does that mean you never bring up sex ed until the kid says, gee, I think I'm pregnant?
Yeah, that is what it means.
Too many adoptive.
Can you comment when this child's 16 or 17 and makes contact with the birth family and begins to connect with them more regularly?
You mean in my instance, what my expectation is? Right now, the issues that he's working on seem to be geared around the abandonment. We, as a parent trying to project what's going on, we didn't know if we were dealing with the abuse issues or what we were dealing with normal adolescent rejection and identity search or what. It seems to be centered around the abandonment issue. When he's ready, knowing my son from the history that I have with him, when he is ready, he will ask for contact with her so that he can confront her with why she abandoned him. That's my expectation of what will happen next. And my hope is to help him to reach resolution in that she just did the best that she was capable of doing. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of us that if we could make the birth parents bad guys, wouldn't that be nice? Because then we could say there was a good guy here and there was a bad guy here. The hardest thing to accept is that there's no bad guys in this situation. And it's really, I think that it's really important to not, when the child is making the birth parent or the adoptive parent or whoever the bad guy, let them have that feeling. We don't have to take that away from them because there's this natural thing that you have to reject everything that your parents have taught you before you can re-accept it in order to grow up, thing. But the hardest reality, the hardest piece of resolution to come to is that there wasn't a good guy and a bad guy. It wasn't black and white. There isn't anybody left to hate. And when there isn't anybody left to hate, then you can come to resolution. But most adoptees, and especially most multiply placed children, adolescents last so long that we're talking about this kind of cognitive ability in their 30s. I mean, their adolescence usually lasts until about 25. They don't exactly flee the nest for good. I mean, they'll flee the nest at 17, and then they come back. Hopefully, they come back only one. You know, usually they come back in multiples. They brought their new family with them. But a lot of times, but generally,
Or they return permanently to the birth family.
that's right. Sometimes they have difficulty in launching at all. Sometimes they return to the birth family for a time and come back, and sometimes they return permanently to the birth family. Sometimes they have to go off all by themselves and they have nobody, and you just worry. You just worry. You know, I think that adoptive parents have this chore of worrying, and it doesn't mean that we're less parents when we're going through that, and it doesn't mean that we don't have any rights. It doesn't mean that we did a bad job. It means that our child's working, so we did a good job when they do that, when they can do that. And if you need another adoptive parent to hold your hand and say you did a good job, your kid ran away. They're out there searching.
Karen, did I understand right that alcoholism played a part in the abuse situation?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just for my own use because I have to live in an area where there seems to be a lot of that. Would it help any to approach this through that door of teaching the child what alcoholism effects are and how that affects their... Is this something you're doing with them?
That helped my son a lot. There's a 12-step, I also do a 12-step program called Children of Alcoholics. They don't 12-step the kids, but they give them a lot of information on not blaming. And they give them a lot of the stories, and they give them a lot of facts on how, because they are at risk for being addictive personalities. So we have to give them at as early as possible age as we can, that their first drink could be the drink that addicts them, and that they can't take the first drink, and why. And so yes, he has a support group. I think the other strong point I'd like to make is not only, as I know I've talked a lot about a support group for mom and dad, a peer group is essential and valuable for these children at 11, from 11 on. So the kids who get that seem to do a little bit better as far as one thing that happens, and we just ran an informational group and did a babysitting type of thing. We wanted to keep it social. We didn't think that the children were going to talk about adoption issues, okay? And so they said, let's just have a play group. So here we go. We've got 4 11-year-old boys in the room. They go, hi, you know, by name's Jim, my name's Ed. Do you ever see your birth mother? Those were the introductions, okay? We got a couple of respite workers, and I went into the room with the kids for the other 8 weeks. The second week they played, the younger kids instituted a game called Let's Give Birth, then let's decide who gets the baby, then let's decide who gets to keep the baby. So some of us got multiply placed babies. They had one person who was an angel. The angel decided who got pregnant. It didn't matter if it was a boy or a girl who got pregnant, because these were 3, 4, and 5-year-olds playing, so they kind of integrate the sexes a lot. But somebody got to carry the baby under their shirt, and then they got to look around at everybody, and they would, then the person giving birth would give birth, and then there was another person assigned to decide who was going to get their baby. Then a third person came along to decide if you were going to keep the baby. A real interesting game that these kids were playing. These little tiny children who were not going to work on adoption issues were playing. Well, they first went around and they gave me all the blonde babies in the room. And then this other one little boy looked at the one black baby in the room and ripped its head off. He decapitated it. That baby didn't get a home. So, or a life. Or a life. That one, I don't know. I don't think that one. I don't know if that one made it to being birthed. I think that one was in the holding pen and got decapitated. I don't know. I had to go through this playroom when we were done every day, make sure everything was back into one piece. Then this one kid looked around at me, and now of the 3 of us that were in the room, there was myself, a black lady, and a very dark Italian lady. And he looked around at all 3 of us and decided that I shouldn't get to keep all these blonde babies. So he gave 2 of the blonde babies to the black lady, and he gave me one of the black children. And he integrated all of our families for us. That child did. And they each had a little piece of busy work that they would come and they would do, you know. And then some of the kids sometimes they would come and take a doll and just throw it on the pile. And that was it. That doll was gone. So interesting how they saw their identities, how they saw the process. They really played it out. And they didn't want to stop. I think the intensity of their play showed a lot. That meeting lasted 2 hours. That's a long time for little ones, to try to keep little ones occupied. At the end of the 2 hours, the parents couldn't get the kids out of the playroom, and they were still playing that game.
How old were these children?
They ranged from 3 to 6, and then we had a bunch of 11 and 12-year-olds too.
And these are all adopted kids?
These were all adopted kids. It was a support, informational support group for adopted families.
Do you think there might have been emotional problems concerning the child that tore the head off a black baby? Do you think there might have been some racial problems or
Who knows?
influence there?
The child was racially mixed who did this.
Oh, okay. That's
Okay.
that answers one.
And I think that that he has a strong sense of worthlessness.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And definitely unfinished business. Yeah.
But we're talking about
Had to be a
abandonment,
reason.
that Jim's working on his abandonment issues, and in my, not as much in my role as an adoptive parent, and I only had that one child, but in my role as first vice president of Truth Seekers, where I see so many adult adoptees searching, they all have that issue. It isn't just Jim's issue because he knows he was abandoned. I don't know the adoptee who doesn't have the issue of abandonment. And unfortunately, not too many will acknowledge that they have it.
When I was going through school, I was put into a very affluent, high IQ kind of type setting. I couldn't compete, and we were considered those dumb adoptees. You know, we were treated. My name was Burge, and I was called Burgeranian, and just really teased and kicked by these kids that were, smarter and everything. And I remember too, you were talking about a sense of expectations with what a child you want to adopt. And I was put in this one lady's home for just like, say, a week. The instant she saw me, she screeched about my bow legs. Oh my God, I didn't know she was so bow-legged, and she sent me back. Yeah. And you think that sense of, I knew what she did. And she was real sweet to me, and she gave me a nice bed, and for a week.
But you heard it.
But I heard it, and I knew it, and I thought I was the ugliest thing that ever lived after that. For the longest time, I thought I was just really, an ugly person to look at. And this sense of lack of self-esteem, and it's followed me through my life, a lot of it.
That really rings true for children who are scarred through abuse.
Yeah.
They know now that there's this ugly part of them that nobody will ever love, and it's real hard. It's real hard.
Or just
to
not
find it.
matching, just
not
not being
matching.
like mom or like dad, adopted in the adoptive family. You don't match.
Don't you think matching is so important?
Yes.
Like one
Yes
of
and
the
no.
big things. As an adoptee, I look so much like my adopted family.
So the whole world didn't come up to you and immediately
No,
know.
it's uncanny. Mind you, adoption was always something we talked a lot about. It was never a big deal at our house.
That's good.
But I talked to other adoptees here and say, I never felt like I belonged to these people. Here I am, Scandinavian descent, and they're Italian or something.
Yeah,
you
but
know?
you can match and still you know that you're not of those people. You know you're of another set.
Yeah, well, that's it. But I think when you blend in a little bit better,
It may make day-to-day easier, I think. I don't know, though. I do see people who are
I
non-matching
think
children.
that it's really important to match expectations.
Yeah.
And
And on that note,
This marks the end of Session 27, Tape 1. Please turn now to Session 27, Tape 2.
we were not matched in that we never even saw my son's picture before we met him. Didn't have any pictures of him for whatever reason.
he tore them all.
He probably did. He probably did. And my daughter disrupted. It was a real quick thing, And so we went out to meet her, and by the time we had told any of our friends that we were thinking about a second child, which we did slowly because nobody in there thought that we would take another one after the first one. And nobody met the second placement with glee. Nobody said, "Oh, good, another one." They went, "What? Is this one going to be like Jimmy?"
Their extended family was really.
And they're like,
"Why
"Oh,
are you doing this?"
I mean, we have a standard joke among adoptive parents. You could put a $50 bill on the end of a fishing pole, and you could reel it out 2 towns long, and babysitters will follow it until they get to your block, and they go, I know where that's going. They will not come to your house and babysit.
Not that good.
And now, we didn't forget it. We're never going to get another babysitter again because now we have 2 of them. But it's remarkable that people will say things to me like, "Didn't you adopt some kids too?" Yeah, here they are. They're not. They're real.
These are the ones.
These are the ones. And they look so much like you. It's unbelievable. So, and we didn't do that. We didn't plan to have that match or to plan to have that. Both of the children are fair-haired and blue-eyed. And
It's nice if they match in
Yeah.
one way.
And then there's my husband with black curly hair, and people
He
think
doesn't
that
match.
he doesn't match.
Yeah, you gotta
And we
get
always
rid of
thought,
him.
well, people
Yeah,
thought
get rid of him.
that I had a child before we got married. Now my husband's also very long-legged. Now my son is growing, and he's got these long legs. And now my son looks more like my husband in body shape than me. So people think now that he's Dan's child.
And
And
not yours.
how can, I don't have legs. I mean, where did this kid get these 8 feet long legs? Not for me. So
I would just say that the matching is nice. I mean, that is nice. It makes it easier, I think, for the kid. But it can set up the whole denial thing in a family. I mean, I have a longtime friend who has 2 adopted children, and I'm really tired of hearing how much she looks like her cousins and how no one ever notices that there's any difference. The person who notices that there's a difference is the adoptee, because she knows that she's not related, or may begin to wonder if she is Aunt so-and-so's kid. You know, was this an in-family or whatever it was. So that all these, when you have a Korean child, for instance, you have to recognize that this is an adoption, right? But sometimes the recognition stops there. I have another friend who gives classes, about being an adoptive parent, who feels that because they talk about Korean culture, that's all her kid needs. Her kid has a birth mother and a birth father, and she has not accepted that. But it's okay because, she's from Korea and she was truly abandoned and she could never really search and find it.
And now she's named Brittany.
That's not true.
And now she's named Brittany.
In Korea,
Of course
you
they
can't
can. Yes, I know.
welcome it,
Right.
and they handle it very differently.
I think so too.
yeah,
And
we were.
tours for exactly that purpose.
Some children truly.
That's the only country.
But at the
Children truly
time,
were.
at the time of, I had friends that, I'm going to go back about 15 years, that adopted Vietnamese children and Korean children. And first of all, they didn't know that the Korean culture doesn't like the Vietnamese culture, and they tried to mix this culture in the household. They had a real explosion. But also, their thought behind specifically seeking these children were that they would be orphans, war orphans. They thought of them as, and they wouldn't search because they thought that they thought about it, and they thought that the search would kill them. And my
So
girlfriend
they become
had
an
said to me,
international family at the risk of avoiding a search.
that's
Yes.
right. That's exactly what they did. And she
It's
said, I have
convoluted.
never been.
Wonderful.
She said, I have never been so wrong in my life. Never, ever do this. When we were pregnant, she said to me, do not do this.
Yes.
She said, if I was adopting this child, this Vietnamese child, because for any other reason than the reason that I did, it probably would have been so much better for the child. But because I did it for this reason, I didn't accept anything of the culture. I didn't take any information they gave me. She thinks that her life began on Pan Am. Because ask these kids where they came from. Ask an adopted child where they came from, okay?
The agency.
We were talking about this one day, and my son said, Kathy wanted to know what hospital I gave birth to her, my daughter. Now my son's at that age, but his sister, she didn't give birth to nobody. She went and got us, like this. She said, did you get me a Jewel? Dominick's. She thought she came from Jewel. Daddy said, yeah, we scanned you. We had to pay by the hour. Jimmy thinks it came from an agency. One child thinks that they came from TWA. Okay. They don't. Sometimes you lose the perspective that you were ever born. That's why the picture of my son's mother pregnant with him is so precious.
Oh, that is so
It's
profound.
so much, it's proof to him that he really was born.
And when adult adoptees search, what's important to them are those footprints.
Yeah.
They get those medical records, they have those footprints.
I'm getting copies made. I want to get permission from, I forget his first name, but Gage, that publishes Geborener Deutscher.
Yeah.
Did you read
Yeah.
the item in the last issue that he did, written by an adult adoptee who was born in Germany? And that is saying everything that you're just saying now about this woman, assuming that she was spit out of the belly of this big plane, because that was her adoption story, was how they rushed to the airport, and so it was this inanimate object that spewed her out there on the tarmac, And I really feel that like these rainbow families and some of these families that have children adopted from overseas should read that so that they can see ahead down the road as to what their child might be feeling like because of their particular adoption
They all
story.
have birth parents.
Right, but that story I think would be so valuable to keep on file to give to parents like that because it really helps.
I know that a lot of our friends thought that we were going to have it easy by taking an older child because the birth parents would already be gone. They're gone. Wherever they could have go. But because
It's been more than 2 years.
It's been more than 2 years. It's not relevant anymore.
They self-destruct after 2 years.
And because at that, I think 7 years ago or 8 years ago when we met my son, people were just getting into the concept of meeting the birth parents before they gave birth. And so all of our friends who
You would
were,
have
all
to
of our
do
trendy
that.
friends
Oh,
who
you would
were
have to do that.
adopting privately were meeting their birth parents and talking about what a traumatic experience it was to have to sit in the room with this girl. You know, and they said, "Oh, you won't have to do that. How lucky, how smart you guys are to do this, to take this kid's on." And they saw, our friends saw the birth parent as somebody that needed to be gone, that needed to be eliminated. And I think that that's a message that society has given to everybody in the triad, that the birth parents, in order for the adoptive family to be a family, the birth family has to dissolve. And that's not true. And I think that that's one thing when...
And that's what we told birth parents to do, is go dissolve.
Yeah, go dissolve. Put this out of your life. It doesn't matter anymore. Right. Okay.
And she was in such a weak position that she had to do that, and the child had no voice.
And I think that there's a strong feeling of worthlessness that comes when birth mother places. I know when Jim's mom signed the surrender after she met us, and she wanted certain promises made to us, and we sat in a room and we had a negotiation of sorts. And she wanted me to promise never to leave him. When she heard that, then she was going to surrender him. But I also told her that she never had to lose him, that he would always love her, and he would always keep her picture, that he would always keep in contact with her. And she just didn't think that she had the right to that. She just couldn't believe that she had the right to that, because she was being weak. She wasn't a good mother. She had been declared unfit by the state, and everything else. And it was hard for me. I mean, they worked a lot with me. I didn't walk in there a phony, making false promises to work with her, because I had to work with somebody that I knew had harmed my son. But I wanted to work with her. See, adoptive parents get very angry at the abusing birth parents at a stage, and I wanted to deal with it before I got to the anger stage, And I did, thank goodness, because I think if I had to do that while I was in the anger stage, I never would have done it, and I never would have been able to live up to it. So there's timing is important in what we do, because you go through it. You and your child do not go through it at the same time. When your child is fantasizing about how wonderful that birth parent was, you may be angry at them at that point in time, because we get angry too. Adoptive parents get angry too. We get angry and we grieve and we get upset that this person wasn't there, that this person didn't take care of their child. 'Cause if I had a wish for either one of my children, if I could make the world okay for them, they would be raised by the people they were born to. We talk a lot about wishes in our house, and the kids say, "But we wish that we would have been born to you." So they'll come back with, and that's a cute little answer. And sometimes, sometimes Jimmy will just say, "Yes, I wish," because he told my son. Loves up to Gary Morgan's office. Gary Morgan is the guardian of the state of children of Illinois. Right? And he says to Gary, "Sit down, we have to talk." Jimmy's always been shy. And Gary sits down and he says, "You take kids away from their birth parents and you move them from home to home to home to home." Gary goes, "Yes, Jim." He said, "It's worse to move from home to home to home to home than to leave them in the first place. So you have to stop it." And he turns around and he walks away. And Gary said, "Well, he's absolutely right." I said, "I know he is."
Sometimes it's
And I said, and he said, right, and he said, and sometimes it takes a child to make us to understand. What he was saying is, don't bounce me around like a ball. He described himself in this film as a ping pong, bouncing from place to place. And then after the reporter's comment was, "Well, now you know you don't have to bounce anymore. You've been here 6 years." And he said, "Now I know that I can stop bouncing." That sense of permanency comes very slow. It takes the rest of your life for it to come.
Which is another thing I think that all adoptive parents need to stress more than they do. They know as adults that this is a permanent thing. They know that. There's a decree and it's all been through the court and the rest of it. But not every child understands that it is a permanent thing. I know when we adopted our son, it was long before anybody ever celebrated, the decree day or anything like that. And I don't see anything wrong with doing that now. That was important to me at the time because I wanted to pretend. I wanted to pretend that this wasn't an adoption. And I think there is that period too that's okay. It's okay to let the adoptive couple who have the new baby fantasize for a while that this is just the way it is for everybody and this is just theirs and so on. But it can't go on. I mean, you do have to get past that. And that's part of the attachment process, but you got to recognize that to this kid, there are these two very real people. And it's a difficult task, too, I think, as an adoptive parent. You have to make the birth family okay. Because if they're not okay, this kid doesn't feel free to be okay. So there has to be some feeling that they did the best they could. In order for him or her to
Or that everybody makes mistakes. Nobody's
That's right.
perfect.
Nobody's
Yeah.
perfect.
And
Watch
that-
out for the word mistake, as she
Yeah,
said
the
in the
mistakes can be
beginning.
a real...
I remember
I have
Well,
Yeah,
nobody's
that's-
perfect.
Yes, you guys